In this video, I'm looking at Fujifilm's premium standard zoom lens, the XF 16-55mm f2.8 RLM-WR2. I'm going to test it in my real-world situations and give you my thoughts on how it performs and my personal feelings about it. I've wanted to try this lens since it was announced, so I hired it from a company called Try the Kit here in the UK, who enable you to try lenses for free for a couple of days, or you can extend it with an additional fee, as I did. Standard zooms are real workhorse lenses. They go from wide to short telephoto with a constant aperture. Traditionally, this has been f2.8. On a full frame camera, these are usually 24 to 70mm lenses, and the 2.8 aperture gives them the ability to work in lower light conditions and give you a shallower depth of field for portraits or those arty shots that we all love. The Fujifilm 16-55 f2.8 gives you a full frame equivalent focal length of 24 to 82.5. So that's really flexible in terms of focal length. But the aperture of f2.8 on an APS-C size sensor isn't quite as good for the shallow depth of field, although you can get quite a decent separation at 55mm. So here is the 16-55. You can see it's Fujifilm red badged lens, and it's a really nice feeling lens, obviously very high quality build. You have the aperture ring, zoom ring and the focus ring, and a 72mm filter thread with a nice big front element, and that it all looks really nice and feels really nice. I was quite interested to see it compared to the 10-24 which I have. The 10-24 has the advantage of being internally zooming, so when you zoom the lens it doesn't change the length of the lens, and the 16-55 does extend towards the 55mm end of the focal length, so that is what you get there. If I take the lens cap off, you can see, so that makes the lens that little bit longer. The aperture ring, I would say, is very easy to turn, and the clicks aren't very pronounced. It's not as pronounced as a lot of the other lenses that I have, especially when you're making the aperture smaller. The clicks are less than when you're making the aperture bigger, but they are very, out when there's noise around. It's a very, very subtle click to me sometimes, and I'm having to look to see whether I've actually changed it. Obviously there's the de-click button here, which you can click, which I haven't used, because as is most of my videos are about photography and not video, I haven't used this. But obviously if you wanted to use this in video, you have the completely de-clicked possibility of the aperture. The zoom ring, I found, unfortunately for me, isn't, if I'm doing a very slow zoom, which I might do when I'm doing my ICM photography, sometimes I zoom and spin the camera around at the same time, and if I do a slow zoom, it feels quite jerky, the movement of the zoom. It's probably fine if you do it quickly, and if you were doing video, if you want to do a very slow zoom in video, you might find it quite tricky, because especially when it's at the 16mm end, there's a bit that's very easy, and then it sort of gets slightly more difficult as we go longer. But I was expecting that to be very smooth, as this is a premium Fujifilm lens, and I was slightly disappointed about that, and it maybe affected my sort of thoughts about the lens, because I wanted it all to be very premium. I mean, maybe it's this copy of the lens which I've got from the Fuji Loan company, as I said, and yeah, in this particular instance it feels slightly jerky. Looking at the size compared to the 18-55 2.8 to 4, obviously it's quite a lot smaller, and it feels quite a lot heavier in relation, but obviously it's a bigger lens, so that's inevitable. And going back to my comparison with the 10-24, I know they're not the same focal lengths, but I was imagining it to feel very much like the 10-24, and it is slightly heavier. So the actual weight of the lens is 410 grams, so it's not a heavy lens, and they've done a lot to shave weight off the previous version, so that they've done a really good job with that. And it focuses down to 30 centimeters according to the specifications. So overall, it's a really nice package, and apart from the slightly easy to turn aperture ring and the slightly sticky zoom ring, I think it feels like another high-end Fujifilm lens. It comes with a petal-shaped lens hood, and that does increase the size of the lens quite a lot, especially when you zoom in, and it's quite a bit wider than the rest of the barrel of the lens, obviously for the 16mm end. Yeah, it does increase the size of the package when you have the lens hood on. So here it is on the X-T5, and you can see it's fairly well balanced with the lens hood on, and there it is with the lens hood off. So it's bigger than obviously the primes are, but not massive. It becomes quite a sizable lens when you've zoomed in. I suppose it depends what you get used to, really. So for further reference, I've just aligned all my Fujifilm lenses up so you can see how they compare size-wise. So let's get into some image quality analysis of this lens. And I started off with this picture shot at f8. In fact, I did a lot of my shots at f8 because that's how I would tend to use this sort of lens, as a walk-around lens, taking shots of different focal lengths and having the practicality and the ease of use of not having to change different primes and everything. So excuse me if there's lots of f8 examples. There are a few other examples of different apertures and a portrait at the end and the like, so that we can compare different usages of the lens. But in my usage, f8 seems to crop up quite a lot. And at f8, this lens is really, really sharp. So if we go into the middle here, beautiful sharpness. And if we go over to the edges of the frame, if I go down to this bottom right-hand corner, it's really nice and sharp there as well. And this is at 16mm, so this is as wide as the lens goes. These next couple of shots are a comparison between the 16-55 here on the left and the 18-50, which is the 2.8-4 on the right. And initially from this size view, they look fairly similar. But if I do zoom in to 100%, the 16-55 is definitely sharper, especially when you start moving to the edges of the frame. There's just much more definition in the image. And over here, I think I noticed maybe my copy is not very good here on the 18-50, but here on the 16-55 it's pretty good, and both of these are at f8. And looking in the middle, quite similar at this zoom range. If I go further in, there's just definitely more detail resolved here, and that's fair really, because the 18-50 is not a lens that Fujifilm say resolves the 40 megapixel sensor of the X-T5. But yeah, interesting that the 16-55 is better, which is good because it costs loads more and it's the newer lens, so that's all good. Just moving on to a shot that was shot at a place called the Devil's Punch Bowl near me, and just to show you the lovely sharpness again, this is at f8 and across the frame, and it deals with the quite harsh lighting conditions really nicely. And this is walking through a town. I just thought I'd take a shot at 16mm f2.8, and if I zoom in 100%, you can see again very sharp in the middle, where obviously at 2.8 this is the only part of the image that is sharp, and at 16mm you're still getting some bokeh. It's a bit busy at 16mm, but you wouldn't really be expecting it any different. This image is also at 16mm f2.8, but beautiful sharpness in the middle here in this central column, and even picking up these cobwebs. And because the out of focus area is a bit further away and there aren't so many highlights in it, it's quite smooth really. Here's an image that I grunged up a bit, and I was thinking this is one of the great things about this sort of standard lens. This is shot at 55mm. I was this side of a river, so I couldn't have moved any closer to this scene, and I wanted to just pick out this section of this metal gantry thing and the foliage around it, and it made for an interesting shot. But you know, with the great flexibility of having a lens that can zoom from 16mm to 55 and gives you wonderful image quality. So across the frame again, really nice and sharp into the corners. So I was really pleased with that shot. It's got a bit of atmosphere about it for me. Excuse me for doing a wall shot, but I thought it was quite an interesting wall. It was an old military thing from the war, so it was quite a wall that had seen a lot of interest. But this is a comparison with the 33mm Fujifilm prime lens on the left and the 16-55 on the right. And it was quite interesting because if we zoom in, the difference in the sharpness is very minimal. Maybe a slight hair to the 33mm, but given that the 16-55 is a zoom lens, that's pretty impressive, I thought. And if we move both images over to the edges, the 16-55 is still just about holding its own with the 33, which is a very highly regarded lens by lots of people, including me. Yeah, very impressive performance from the zoom lens. This next scene, I was going to visit this ruined abbey that's close to me, and it's quite a nice sort of rural scene. So I snapped this and then zoomed into 55mm to show you the difference and the amount of reach that you can get with this lens. So this is at 16mm, and that's similar scene at 55mm. So if I go backwards and forwards, you can get quite a long way with this sort of zoom range. And I zoom into 100%. Loads of detail, pick out these Canada geese there roaming about in the middle of a field, and lots of detail in the leaves and all of this stonework from the abbey. On walking round to the abbey, there were lots of flowers with insects on them, and so I tried out a bit of pseudo macro type photography. This is at f8 and 55mm, and caught this bee quite well, and zooming in just about captured focus. The next shot I've got is even closer because I was trying to see how close I could get. It was the only one that actually got the bee in focus, but there's a blade of grass in front. But I thought that was pretty impressive for this lens, that you can get in that close, and this is at 100%, so that's a pity this is in the way. I probably should have stayed around longer and tried harder, but yeah, just an impressive capability of the lens. And then a few shots from the abbey, nice contrasty shot with through this window, through that door, that lady standing in the middle. Just thought it was an interesting shot, and where I was focusing is beautifully sharp. These next two shots is another comparison between the 16-55, which is now on the left, just to keep you guessing, and the 33mm f1.4 prime, both of them set at f5.6 in the center of the frame. This is the 16-55 on the left. They're very similar, maybe a hair sharper on the 33mm, but not much in it. But interestingly, when I went over to the corner, the 33mm stays sharper, and there is a tiny little bit of loss of detail in the corners of the 16-55 at this mid aperture of 5.6. And then this is shot at f2.8 at f16. We were out for a walk with some friends who have a couple of beagles, and this is Bernard, or Naughty Bernard as he's known. So he was looking up for a treat, so I thought that was quite a nice shot, and beautifully sharp on his eye there. So that was really good. Obviously focusing is very good, and everything with this lens being a Fuji red badge lens. Another shot of townscape, just again showing the really nice rendering and sharpness, and no, I mean it is f8, so I wouldn't be expecting it, but no sort of chromatic aberrations around things, even at these high contrast areas. So yeah, really nice images. A couple more just from my wandering around the town. This is quite an interesting one at 32.9mm f2.8, trying to isolate these lovely flower heads against this reasonably interesting background. And this shot I thought was quite interesting, this sort of contradiction of these old buildings with this modern electric bike just parked outside. And again, if we look around this image, shot at f8, the detail is just amazing. The flexibility of just being able to zoom in and create the image that you want with a zoom lens is a very powerful thing. One more street scene from that walk around. Again, even if we zoom down here, There's loads of detail in this image, and we could probably see what these people are eating, but we won't zoom in and spoil their dinner. And then these last two shots. So this is a portrait, obviously, of me. I got my wife to take this, and you can see quite a nice, sharp focusing in on my eye and detail of my bristly face. And I also did a comparison and got her to take a shot with the Sigma 56mm f1.4 to show you the difference that you get between f2.8 and f1.4. So if you, after the full creamy background, then the f2.8 is difficult to get that full-on creamy background, and it can be slightly busy and distracting, whereas when you go full f1.4, everything just fades away. But similar levels of sharpness between these two, maybe a hair sharper on the prime lens, but not a million miles away. So this lens does have a capability to produce some nice portraits. Maybe you just need to make sure your background's even further away if you want after the completely melted away background. I really wanted to love this lens, and indeed it has wowed me with its image quality. The thing is, I've come to view my Fuji kit as my personal photographic companion, which comes with me to document my own life or create my abstract images, and it sort of leads me to indulge my creative side. I've also grown to love the smaller compact lenses that are available, and some of the new third-party primes really push the capabilities of what size and weight, and managing to give you a bright aperture as well. There are flaws and character in this setup, but it doesn't seem to matter because that's what gives it the vibe. The 16-55 is a standard zoom and does what it does really, really well. However, I feel a bit crazy for saying it, but I don't find it that exciting. It doesn't have the brightest aperture for those glory shots, and it's slightly bigger and more cumbersome than I sort of personally feel that the Fuji system, or my Fuji system, wants to be. I sometimes use these cameras for my professional work, and that's more about representing things accurately and being technically correct. And this is where I saw the 16-55 slotting into my kit. But even though it does tick these boxes, I'm still not quite sure about it. I think it's an emotional thing rather than a technical thing. And then there's the fact that in the UK here it's £1,149. I think for someone who wants great quality images, the flexibility of a good zoom range, and is happy with the size and handling of the 16-55, it's a really stellar choice. And it really fulfills many photographic tasks, but I find myself wishing that Fujifilm could have made something a bit smaller, closer to the size of the Sigma 18-50 f2.8, or something more exciting like the new Sigma 17-40 f1.8. Maybe I'm asking the impossible and should just grow up and get on with it, but I can dream, can't I? So I seem to have reached the conclusion that this is a brilliant, high-quality lens that many people will love, but at the moment, it just hasn't won me over. For now, I'm happy with my prime lenses and a bit less convenience and practicality. I'm aware that with one lens I could replace several primes, but I like the feel of the camera with a lightweight lens on it. Obviously, unless I'm wanting a massive telephoto lens on it or something. So I hope you found this video interesting. Let me know in the comments what you think of the 16-55 if you've had a chance to use one, and whether you can relate to my sort of emotional bond that I seem to need to have with my Fujifilm kit. I'd be really grateful if you could subscribe to the channel, as it really helps me make more of these videos going forward. But for now, take care, and I hope to see you again here soon.